The tally board hadn't been updated in 3 cycles, and nobody seemed to give a slag. Usually there'd be a clamour, a near riot when the numbers didn't change. Miners lived and died by those numbers. Quotas met, bonuses earned, debts paid. But now, it was just another detail the foreman had let slip. It made the back of my neck prickle, like that feeling when you know a tunnel's about to go. Old man Hemmer used to say, "An empty tally's an empty belly." He was full of that kind of homespun wisdom, right up until a slab of ceiling took his head off clean. I was right next to him, felt the spray. Tantalus paid out a month's wages to his widow as compensation, standard procedure. Didn't matter that the support struts had been overdue for replacement. Didn't matter that Hemmer had been warning Foreman Lundy about them for a week. Profits before people, that's the Tantalus way. His wife took their kids and left Ashmoth on the next freighter out. We haul black glass, see? It's the only reason anyone's here. This whole forsaken rock is one big company town, and Tantalus owns it all, lock, stock, and barrel. The air, the water, the permits, even the debt most of us are born into. They control it all. We are born into debt and will die trying to pay it off. The suits on Earth don't care. Black glass is worth more than its weight in diamonds, fuels half the tech in the outer colonies. They need it, and we're the poor bastards who have to pull it out of this hellhole. There used to be a lottery back on Earth. Winning meant guaranteed work on Ashmoth. Guaranteed ruin, more like it. Not many sign up for that these days. My father used to tell me stories about the early days, when Ashmoth was still considered a paradise. Said you could see the stars then, before the ash choked the sky. Said the air was clean, the water pure. He died when I was 7, old enough to remember the stories, but young enough that they felt like legends more than memories. I used to picture him, squinting up at a clear, star-filled sky, a sight I'd never see. He wasn't wrong about the stars, I guess. Now, all you see is red. The whole damn sky burns like the forge of some angry god, day in, day out. No day, no night, just the red and the heat. Tidally locked, they call it. One side always faces the star, one side always faces away. We're on the border, the twilight zone where it's always some infernal, polluted dawn. My grandfather, Pops, he came here with the first wave, a real pioneer. He used to say the black glass sang to you, said it showed you things. He died wheezing his lungs out, same as my old man. Black glass miner to the core, just like me. Seth, third of his name, born and bred to dig. Lately I've been wondering. Take my bunkmate Ty. Last week he just walked into the pit. No warning, no struggle, just a slow, steady march into the molten rock. Like he was sleepwalking. Face slack, eyes vacant. They called it Ashmoth Stare, said he'd gone thermal. Said he'd be the last. That was a month after they scrapped mandatory psych evals to cut costs. I saw him go in. I remember the way the heat shimmered, distorting his body as he walked further and further out, closer to the pit's lip. I remember the way the bright orange glow turned his skin a sickening red, like the sky. I remember how his boots started to smoke, then his legs. I remember the smell of burning flesh as he went in. No scream. Not that anyone could have heard it over the roar of the magma. I tried to tell Foreman Lundy about it, about the way Ty had been acting. I tried to tell Foreman Lundy about it, about the way Ty had been acting. Said he'd been seeing things, hearing things. Lundy just laughed, told me to get back to work. Said the only thing Ty was hearing was the siren song of early retirement. Said I should focus on meeting my quota or I'd be joining him, minus the severance package. It's always the same. They don't care what's happening to us, as long as the black glass keeps flowing. The company made some noises about increasing safety protocols after Ty, but it was all for show. They bumped up our hazard pay by a fraction of a percent and called it a day. It's like they think a few extra credits will make us forget about the dangers, about the friends we've lost, about the fact that we're all slowly dying down here. I've seen the shapes too, just like Ty said he did. Flickering things like heat haze, but wrong. They move against the air currents, coil and uncoil like serpents made of smoke. They don't belong. Not in the tunnels, not in the colony, not anywhere on Ashmoth. And the howl, that's getting worse too. It's not just a low rumble anymore. It's a vibration that gets into your bones, into your teeth, a physical thing. It makes my head throb and my stomach churn. And sometimes when it's really bad, I feel like I'm going to lose my lunch. And other times, I see the shapes, clear as day. Like they're riding the sound waves. Like they're getting closer. I keep thinking about what happened to Ty, about the look on his face as he walked into the pit. It wasn't fear or pain or even resignation. It was like he was in a trance, like he was being called. And that's what scares me the most. Because lately I've been feeling that same pull, that same strange urge to just walk away, to step into the darkness, to let the heat take me. It's a crazy thought, I know. But it's there, lurking in the back of my mind, a dark whisper that I can't quite shake. And every day it gets a little bit louder, a little bit harder to ignore. Every day I feel the black glass calling, and I'm starting to wonder if I'll be strong enough to resist when it finally decides to speak my name. The crew was smaller than usual, maybe 2/3 of the regular head count. More and more men were calling in sick or just not showing up. Another miner disappeared from the colony last night. Vanished. Even the foremen were starting to look spooked. Nobody was talking about it, but everyone knew. The black glass was getting to us. "Morning, Seth," a voice rasped, and I turned to see Heston leaning against a haulage cart, his face grimy with soot. He was older than me, pushing 50 maybe, with a cough that rattled like a loose chain in a mine shaft. He'd been on Ashmoth longer than anyone I knew, and he'd seen it all. "Heston," I nodded, falling into step beside him as we headed towards the designated dig site. "You hear about Emmett?" Heston spat a thick globule of something that looked suspiciously like engine oil onto the ground. "Gone walkabout, eh? Another one bites the dust. Tantalus will be importing fresh meat soon enough. You think they'll ever run out of bodies to throw at this place?" "Not as long as black glass is worth more than a man's life," Heston wheezed, his cough turning into a hacking fit. He leaned against the wall, clutching his chest. "You all right, old-timer?" I asked, a genuine concern creeping into my voice. Despite his rough exterior, Heston was one of the few people I considered a friend on this forsaken rock. He waved me off, gasping for breath. "Just the Ashmoth air taking its toll, son. It'll be the death of me yet." He straightened up, a grim smile on his face. "But not today. Today we dig." The dig site was a cavernous expanse deep into the side of a volcanic mountain. The air here was thick with the smell of sulfur and something metallic that made the back of my throat burn. Black glass veins, like glittering black cracks, ran through the rock face, glowing with an inner luminescence that was both beautiful and unsettling. They spread throughout the cavern like a disease, infecting the rock with their strange energy. We worked in pairs, one operating the geoscanner, the other setting the charges. I was paired with a young guy named Kit, fresh off the transport. He was pale and nervous, his eyes wide with fear and awe as he took in the landscape. I could almost smell the naivete on him. "You ever seen anything like this?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Get used to it," I said, not unkindly. "It doesn't get any prettier." "They say it whispers to you," Kit continued, his eyes fixed on the black glass veins. "The rock, I mean. They say it gets inside your head." "Don't listen to rumors," I said more sharply than I intended. "Just keep your head down, do your job, and try not to breathe too deep." As the day wore on, the howl started up, a wave of pressure that pushed the stale air against my face, making it difficult to breathe. I felt it in my gut first, a deep, sickening lurch, like the drop of a failing lift. Then came the headache, not a throb but a grinding pressure behind my eyes, as if someone were tightening a vice around my skull. The geoscanner started to give faulty readings, the needle fluctuating wildly, mirroring the way the shapes in the shadows seemed to distort. "You see that?" Kit whispered, pointing to a section of the rock face where the black glass was particularly dense. "It's moving." I squinted, trying to focus. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I caught it. A ripple in the luminescence, like something was flowing beneath the surface. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic. "It's nothing," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Just the heat, playing tricks on your eyes." A sharp crack echoed through the cavern, followed by a low rumble. One of the support beams, weakened by the constant tremors and likely shoddy Tantalus craftsmanship, had snapped. A hairline fracture spider-webbed across the ceiling directly above Kit. Reacting instantly, I rushed towards him, shoving him hard in a desperate attempt to push him clear. But the rock was already falling. The push only managed to knock him off balance as a massive slab of rock came crashing down. We both scrambled back, coughing in the dust-filled air, the roar of the collapse echoing in our ears. When the dust settled, it was clear Kit hadn't been fast enough. The rock had landed squarely on his legs, crushing them and pinning him to the ground. A high-pitched, keening scream, a sound that seemed to pierce straight through my heart, ripped through the din of the howl. His face contorted in pain, eyes wide with terror. Blood seeped from beneath the rock, staining the black dust a dark, thick red. Heston and a few other miners rushed over. We tried to lift the rock, but it was too heavy. We needed a hauler with a winch, and the nearest one was on the other side of the cavern. "Hold on, kid," Heston said, kneeling beside Kit. "We'll get you out." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. Kit's legs were crushed, mangled beyond repair. Even if we got him out, he'd never walk again. And on Ashmoth, a man who can't work is a dead man. As the minutes passed, Kit's screams gradually subsided into whimpers, then silence. His breathing became shallow, his pulse weak. The shapes seemed to gather around him, drawn to his pain, his fear. Or maybe that was just my mind playing tricks on me. Just before dawn, Kit took his last breath. His eyes, once so full of life, stared blankly up at the ceiling, reflecting the glow of the black glass. Another life claimed by the mines, another soul lost to the darkness. Back in the colony, the routine was the same, only the faces changed. Another shift, another meal of synth protein that tasted like recycled cardboard, another few hours of restless sleep in my cramped bunk. The colony was a labyrinth of prefabricated structures, all connected by narrow corridors that smelled of sweat and despair. The walls were thin, and you could hear everything: the coughing, the snoring, the muttered curses, the occasional sob. Privacy was a luxury none of us could afford. The food was bland and unsatisfying, the only purpose to provide the body with the nutrients to do the job and live another day. I sat in the mess hall, picking up my food, my thoughts still on Kit. His death had shaken me more than I cared to admit. He was young, naive, full of dreams that Ashmoth would quickly crush. Now he was just another statistic, another name on the long list of miners who had perished in the pursuit of black glass. I pushed the food away. Appetite gone. "You gonna eat that?" a voice asked, and I looked up to see Digger, a veteran with a face like a cracked rock. He was a man of few words, but he had a reputation for fairness and a knack for finding the richest black glass veins. "Knock yourself out," I said, pushing my tray towards him. Digger grunted his thanks and sat down, shoveling the food into his mouth. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clatter of utensils. "Another one gone," Digger said eventually, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah," I replied. "Kid never had a chance." "They never do," Digger said, shaking his head. "This place chews them up and spits them out. You ever think about getting out?" Digger let out a harsh laugh. "Out? Where would I go? I've been on Ashmoth so long I wouldn't know how to live anywhere else. Besides," he added, a dark glint in his eyes, "the black glass gets in your blood. It calls to you. You can't escape it." It was the same thing Heston had said. The same thing I'd been feeling myself. The pull of the black glass, the insidious whisper that seemed to grow stronger every day. After the meal, I went back to my bunk, hoping to get some sleep before my next shift. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind was replaying Kit's death, the shapes in the mine, the howl, the feeling of the black glass calling to me. I tossed and turned, the thin mattress offering little comfort. Every creak and groan of the structure seemed amplified in the darkness. The black glass. It was everywhere, even here, in the walls, in the floor, in the very air we breathed. It was a part of the colony, a part of us. Finally, I drifted off into a restless slumber. I dreamed of the mines, of the black glass veins, of the shapes that moved in the shadows. I dreamed of Ty, walking into the pit, his face serene, his eyes empty. I dreamed of Kit, his legs crushed beneath the rock, his screams echoing through the darkness. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, my body drenched in sweat. The digital clock on the wall blinked 3:17 a.m. The air in my bunk felt different, colder, heavier. It felt charged somehow, like the air before a storm. A low moan, a sound of pure agony drifted through the thin walls, making the hair on my arms stand up. I sat up, listening intently. The moaning continued, growing louder. It was definitely coming from outside my bunk. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I moved to the door, my hand hovering over the release. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the button and the door slid open. The corridor outside was dark, but I could see him. Kit. He was lying on the floor just a few feet away, his body contorted in pain. The massive rock was still on top of him, his legs crushed beneath its weight. Blood, dark and viscous, pooled around him, reflecting the dim light of the corridor. "Help me," he moaned, his voice a raspy whisper. "Please, it hurts." I stared at him, speechless, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. It was like a nightmare come to life, a scene from my darkest fears. I wanted to run, to scream, to get as far away from him as possible. But I was frozen in place, trapped between disbelief and a growing sense of horror. "Seth," he whispered again, his eyes fixed on mine. "Don't leave me." His eyes. They weren't the same. They were black, utterly black, like two pieces of finely polished black glass. They seemed to glow with an inner light, the very luminescence I had witnessed in the mines. It was the same light that surged through the veins of the black glass itself, a light that reached into my soul and squeezed. The black glass was inside him. It had claimed him, just as it had claimed Ty, and as it was now reaching for me. He extended his hand, a hand smeared with blood, encrusted with black dust, crushed bone and a substance resembling liquid black glass, and grasped for my hand, while his mouth opened impossibly wide, releasing a muffled, distorted version of the howl that almost sounded like a plea for help. My hand jerked back as if burned. Kit's blood mixed with that oily black residue felt like acid on my skin. The stench of it filled the narrow corridor, momentarily overriding the familiar stink of the colony. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the thin wall of my bunk with a thud. The sound of his crushed bones grinding against the rock, that guttural, inhuman moan. It was all too much. It was real. He was real. But how? My mind scrambled for purchase, grasping for any rational explanation. A hallucination, sleep paralysis, stress-induced psychosis. All of those were textbook symptoms of prolonged exposure to Ashmoth's environment. But none of them explained the cold dread that sank its claws into my gut, the primal fear that screamed at me to run. None of them explained the way the black flecks in Kit's blood seemed to glow, radiating that inner light. Seth. The sound of my name, warped and distorted by that same resonance as the howl, slithered from his mangled form. It was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the confined space, bouncing off the walls, penetrating my skull. "Help me!" He twitched again, his body spasming. The rock remained, an unyielding weight crushing the life out of him, just as it had in the mines. But he was dead. I saw him die. We all did. Was this some sort of cruel, twisted joke perpetrated by the black glass? My eyes darted up and down the corridor. Empty. The other miners were either asleep or lost in their own private hells. No one to witness this. No one to confirm the reality of what I was seeing, or the shattering of my own sanity. Doubt, cold and sharp, pierced through the initial wave of terror. Was I losing it? Was this the fate of every miner who spent too long on Ashmoth? A slow descent into madness, haunted by the ghosts of the dead, the victims of the black glass. He moved again, a slight agonizing shift of his body. The sound of bones scraping on rock, a sickeningly familiar sound, brought bile up my throat. His head lolled to the side, those black glass eyes fixing on me. They seemed to bore into me, stripping away the layers of my being, exposing the raw, vulnerable core beneath. "Don't leave me," he rasped, the words contorted by pain and by something else, something alien. "Take me to it." To it? The question escaped my lips before I could stop it. His head bobbed, a slow, deliberate movement. "The source." His hand, slick with blood and that unsettling black substance, reached out again, trembling. "Take me home." Home. What did he mean by home? The colony, the mines, or something else entirely? Was he talking about the dead zone? The song of the Spire? Was this the black glass speaking through him, using him as a puppet to lure me into its depths? The legends, the whispers, the things the old-timers talked about, were they more than just stories? I took a step back, then another, my eyes locked on Kit's horrifying form. His black glass gaze followed me, unwavering, a silent promise of the fate that awaited me if I stayed. I can't," I stammered, the words barely audible. His body went rigid, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something in those black, soulless eyes. Anger. Despair. Then, the blackness in his eyes deepened, becoming even more absolute, and the howl ripped through the corridor, a physical force that slammed into me, throwing me back against the wall. The walls, the floor, my body, everything vibrated in unison with that agonizing sound. Kit's form, pinned under the rock, began to lose its definition, the edges blurring, shimmering like heat haze. The rock itself softened, the hard lines melting away, becoming fluid. The stench of blood and black glass intensified, a nauseating wave that made my stomach heave. Then, as I watched, horrified and helpless, Kit's body started to liquefy. Flesh, bone, blood, all of it melted, flowing together into a black, oily puddle that spread outwards, reflecting the dim corridor lights. The rock followed suit, dissolving into the same dark liquid. It was as if they were being unmade, reverting to some primal state, consumed by the very substance they had been seeking to extract. The black puddle spread, flowing outwards in all directions, disappearing under doorways and into the narrow crevices of the colony's structure. It seeped into the floor, the walls, disappearing from view, leaving behind only the lingering stench and the echo of the howl, fading into a silence. The stench of the black glass lingered long after the horrifying spectacle in the corridor. Sleep was a lost cause. My mind was a maelstrom of fear and confusion. I needed answers, or at least a way to make sense of what was happening. I needed Heston. The next morning I found him in the mess hall, hunched over a tray, his usual scowl etched deep into his face. He looked even worse than usual, his skin clammy, his eyes bloodshot. The cough that always seemed to rack his body was deeper now, as though something was slowly eating away at him from the inside. "Heston," I said, sliding onto the bench opposite him. "I need to talk to you." He grunted, his eyes fixed on his food. "Can't it wait, Seth? I'm busy." "It's about Kit," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. And the black glass. Something happened last night. Something I can't explain." Heston finally looked up, his gaze sharp and penetrating. What did you see, boy? I hesitated, unsure where to begin, how to describe the impossible scene that had played out in the corridor. But I had to tell someone, and Heston, with his decades of experience on Ashmoth, was my only hope. I recounted the events of the previous night, starting with the moaning, the rock, Kit's crushed body, and finally, the horrifying way he dissolved into nothing. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You saw it too, then," he said finally. "The call of the black glass." "What is it, Heston?" I asked, my voice pleading. "What's happening to us?" He leaned back, his eyes drifting towards the ceiling, as if searching for answers in the grimy metal panels. "They say the black glass is alive, Seth. Not alive like you and me, but sentient. A consciousness that spans eons, buried deep within this rock. They say it whispers to you, calls to you, draws you in." "The howl," I said, remembering the stories, the rumors. "Is that it?" Heston nodded slowly. "It's a part of it, a vibration, a resonance. It gets into your body, your blood, your mind, changes you, makes you see things, makes you want things." "The Spire," I said. "What is it?" Heston's eyes narrowed. "A legend, a story the old-timers tell. They say there's a place deep in the dead zone. They say it's the heart of the black glass consciousness, the source of its power." "And the song?" I pressed. "What's the song of the Spire?" "They say it's the black glass true voice," Heston said. "A song that can drive a man mad. A song that can show you things, unimaginable things. A song that can make you want to join it, become a part of it." He coughed again, a deep, rattling sound that shook his entire body. This time, the cough wouldn't stop. He doubled over, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. "Heston!" I exclaimed, reaching out to him. "What's wrong?" He tried to speak, but all that came out was a strangled gasp. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, stared up at me, filled with a terror I had never seen before. I saw a faint, black sheen on his lips spreading outwards like a stain. It was the same oily blackness I had seen on Kit, the same residue that had clung to my skin. The black glass. It was inside him. Panic seized me. I yelled for help, my voice echoing through the mess hall. A few miners turned to look, but no one moved. They had seen this before. They knew, just as I did, that there was nothing anyone could do. Heston's body convulsed, his cough turning into a wet, gurgling sound. The blackness spread rapidly, covering his lips, his chin, his cheeks. His eyes, once sharp and full of life, began to dull, to cloud over, turning that same flat, lifeless black I had seen in Kit's eyes. Then, with a final shuddering breath, he went still. His body slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a thud. The mess hall fell silent. Heston's death hit me harder than I expected. He was a link to the old Ashmoth. Now, that link was gone, severed as cleanly as old man Hemmer's head. The mess hall was silent as they carried his body away, the black stain on his face a grim reminder of the power of the black glass. During one of the shifts, deep in a newly opened section of the mine, I met a geologist mapping the black glass veins. He was crouched over a geoscanner, a wiry, intense figure with eyes that burned with unsettling energy. His clothes were patched and stained with the same black dust that covered everything in this forsaken place. And his gear, strapped haphazardly to his body, seemed to have become an extension of himself. He looked like he'd been living in the mines for years. "I haven't seen you around before," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. He didn't flinch, didn't even look up. "I tend to keep to the deeper sections," he replied, his voice raspy like sandpaper. "Places others avoid." "I'm Seth," I said, extending a hand. He finally turned, his gaze piercing. His eyes were shot through with a web of crimson veins, stark against the whites. But it was the pupils that caught my attention. They were dilated, almost completely black, reflecting the light of the geoscanner. "They call me Virgil," he said, ignoring my outstretched hand. "I map the veins." "Geologist?" I asked, gesturing to his equipment. He let out a harsh laugh. Geologist, cartographer, prophet of the abyss. Take your pick. I chart the course of the black glass. I follow its song. The song of the Spire? I asked, the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. Virgil's eyes narrowed. You've heard it then? The call of the deep? The whisper of the old one? I've heard stories, I admitted. Heston told me about it. Heston, Virgil repeated, a flicker of something, sadness perhaps, crossing his face. Another one lost to the black. It gets us all in the end, unless we learn to listen. Listen to what? I asked. To the howl. The howl is just the beginning, Virgil said. A prelude. The true song is deeper, more complex. It's the song of creation, of destruction, the song of the Spire. He turned back to his geoscanner. The device emitted a series of beeps and clicks, and a holographic image flickered to life above it. It was a map of the mine, but unlike any I had ever seen. What is that? I asked, pointing to the glowing web. The song, made visible, Virgil said, his eyes gleaming. The music of the spheres, rendered in light and shadow. It's the nervous system of Ashmoth, the consciousness of the black glass, and it's all flowing towards one point. He tapped the screen, zooming in on a location deep within the dead zone. The Spire, he breathed, his voice filled with awe. The heart of it all. That's where the song is strongest. That's where the answers lie. You've been there, I asked, a sense of dread creeping into my voice. The dead zone was off limits, a place of legend and terror. No one who went in ever came out the same if they came out at all. Virgil smiled, a wild, unsettling grin. Not yet, but I will. I must. It calls to me, sings to me, and I intend to answer. He was mad, I realized. Completely and utterly mad. But there was something else in his madness, a spark of something that resonated with my own desperate search for answers. He had been exposed to it longer, seen more of it. Maybe he held the key to understanding what was happening. What do you think it wants? I asked him. Virgil turned back to me, his eyes burning with that unsettling intensity. He leaned in close. It wants to become whole again. It wants to spread. It wants to awaken. The colony was a ghost town. More and more miners were disappearing. The tally board remained unchanged, the numbers frozen. Tantalus had stopped sending new workers. It was as though they had written us off, abandoned us to our fate. It was only a matter of time before the whole operation shut down. One night I woke with a jolt. The howl was louder than ever, a physical vibration that shook my bunk. But it wasn't just the sound. It was a pull, a deep, visceral urge that originated from within my body. Driven by a morbid curiosity, I rose from my bunk. My movements felt automatic, as if my body was no longer under my own control. I needed to see it for myself, this place that haunted my dreams. The journey to the dead zone was a blur. I moved through the darkened tunnels, the howl, a constant companion, guiding me, urging me forward. The deeper I went, the more intense it became, until it felt as though my skull would shatter from the pressure. The entrance to the dead zone was marked by a crudely painted skull and crossbones, a warning that had lost all meaning. I stepped across the threshold, leaving behind the last vestiges of the familiar world. The air here was different, heavier, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. I followed the song, the pull, the howl, letting it guide me deeper into the heart of the dead zone. The tunnels here were unstable, the walls cracked and crumbling. It was as if the planet itself was rejecting this place, trying to cast it out like a diseased limb. The Spire wasn't a structure, not in the traditional sense. It wasn't a towering monolith, as the legends described. It was the opposite. It was a void, a vast emptiness at the center of the mine, a perfect sphere of nothingness, a black hole carved into the heart of Ashmoth. It was an absence, a negation, a place where the physical world ceased to exist. As I gazed into the void, the howl, reached a fever pitch, emanating from the emptiness itself. And within that emptiness, I saw them. Distorted reflections shimmering like mirages, faces I recognized, faces I had tried to forget. Ty, his face serene, his eyes vacant, just as he had been when he walked into the magma. Kit, his body mangled, his legs crushed beneath an invisible weight, his eyes black pits of despair. Heston, his face contorted in a silent scream, the black stains spreading across his skin. And countless others, miners I had known, miners I had never met, all trapped within the void, their forms flickering, their features indistinct, their eyes black and empty. It seemed as though everyone who had ever vanished or perished on Ashmoth was contained within this void. Their voices merged with the howl, a chorus of whispers that called to me, beckoning me to join them. I felt it then, the pull of the void, the desire to step into the emptiness, to become one with the nothingness. It was a siren song, a promise of oblivion, an end to the pain, the fear, the struggle. My feet moved of their own accord, taking me closer to the edge. The ground beneath me vibrated in time with the howl, with the pull. The void awaited, an infinite emptiness ready to consume me. I was on the precipice, the boundary between existence and non-existence. My silhouette, cast against the glow of the distant veins, began to waver, the edges blurring. The hard lines of my form, the contours of my body, started to lose their definition, as if the void was already reaching out, claiming me, pulling me into its depths. The pull intensified, and my reflection began to merge with the countless others trapped within the blackness. The line between the physical world and the void grew thin, the howl an overwhelming torrent of sound, and I teetered on the edge, ready to fall, ready to become one with the heart of nothing. The darkness beckoned, and my silhouette distorted further, becoming less human, more like the shapeless entities within the void. I closed my eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on my cheek. Then, I stepped off the edge, and the abyss claimed me.